So welcome everyone, and again, for those who have joined since I said it last, thanks for taking some time this afternoon to come and join with me here. But before I start, because I think at a justice-oriented thing, I think it's important just to acknowledge that where I am standing in my office at home right now, I'm standing on land that belongs to the Mississauga Anishinaabe, and I stand here because of the Williams Treaty of 1920. And I hope that wherever you find yourself right at this moment, that you are grateful for the people who have allowed us to come and to be with them in their community as we share this land and all of its many resources together. I'm going to talk for a few minutes about an overview of where we are at St. John's, and then I'm going to give two examples of some of the work that we do. Then I'm going to talk about the COVID-19 challenges that we've experienced here in Peterborough, which is really what I was asked to do. And then maybe take some time at the end to look at things that you might be able to do in your local parish to assist people who are either at risk for or experiencing the things that I've listed there on the slide. And so in the last 2 points in particular, I hope that we'll be able to have some conversation about those things. So some history. I'm the rector of St. John's in Peterborough. It's the oldest church in the city of any denomination. And we've been perched on a hill downtown close to the shore of the Otonabee River for 195 years. And when you walk into our historic limestone building and look around, it's obvious that the founders of St. John's were synonymous with the founders of Peterborough. There are a whole bunch of memorials around the walls that read like a list of the principal streets in the city, including Armour, who was the first schoolmaster and rector. And this church was clearly a church that had served the, for lack of a better term, county aristocracy through the years. A reality that was really painfully realized in the first decade of the 20th century, when one of the other city Anglican churches was founded in part by working families who felt that they were second-class parishioners at St. John's. And through its history, the parish has been a place of worship for many people that have come from professional, white-collar, governing classes, if you will, right up through the 1990s, when it had a reputation for being an exclusive and insulated parish. And I'm telling you all that because under the leadership of my predecessor, St. John's began a momentous shift in culture from one that you might have heard called Church on the Hill to downtown church. And it was a movement that saw the parish begin to turn its gaze outwards towards the city and to see the needs that existed in the downtown core. One of the first ministries that St. John's began that served the welfare of the people in our community was the Saturday lunch that was made available free to anyone who came, and was organized by parishioners and run by volunteers, mostly from the parish, but from other churches as well. And while lunch was being served, the clergy, who each took turns spending a Saturday with the program, made the rounds chatting with guests and provided pastoral care when needed. About 10 years ago, to this ministry was added an emergency overflow shelter, which ran from November 1st to April 30th each year, providing a late night light meal and space for about 20 people who had nowhere else to sleep. In Peterborough right now, there are 3 shelters, one for men, one for women, and one for people under 25. They operate as the shelters of first resort for those without a place to stay. But these shelters are highly barriered. They have strict rules around behavior and participation in the city's registration process for a by name list, which is simply the list where your name goes on to access services, particularly housing. For people who are skeptical of authority for whatever reason, people who have suffered abuse and cannot function well in a close quarters shelter with little personal privacy, and those with addictions and mental health challenges, the city shelters are difficult to get into and easy to get kicked out of. The warming room, the shelter that we operated, was purposely designed to be low barrier. We made it as easy as possible to stay, and we endeavored to support our guests as much as possible through their challenges, with banning people for troublesome behavior and option of last resort. This resulted in the city often accusing us of being obstructionist and laissez-faire because we didn't subscribe to their rule-based philosophy. Our shelter of last resort often became the first choice for people who needed support rather than judgment. The warming room moved to a full year round program in 2017, but was terminated by the city in July 2019 and taken over by municipal staff a few months later. When the shelter was terminated, we'd been seeing an average of 36 people every night. When the city took it over, that number fell to between 5 and 15, depending on the weather and how desperate people were for a warm, dry place to sleep. The slide that I have up right now is from a report that was released last week by the United Way here in Peterborough. And you can see that on the right-hand side, I hope you can see if you have me on speaker view so that I'm bigger than everyone else, that there was 119 people using shelters in the city in 2019, which is a 150% increase from 47 on average in 2011. And in the middle number there, just above the red ones, warming room was our shelter, which until the end of June was seeing 36 people on average every night. And then the overflow shelter, which is the single number right below that, was 10, which is the average of 5 to 15. That was the city when they had to scramble to open a new shelter. In May of 2019, there was a small number of tents that appeared in Victoria Park, the largest park in the downtown. It's right across the street from the church, and it sits kitty corner from City Hall. It's essentially the city block-sized front lawn of the county courthouse. Police removed some of the tents in mid-May, and I made it known after consulting with my parish leadership that St. John's would allow people without shelter to tent on the grounds of the church, because we also own most of a city block, provided that tenters meet with me first and undertake to observe a code of conduct that basically required people to acknowledge that everyone at St. John's, whether it was our tenting guests, parishioners, or the large number of people that come to belong to groups that use our parish buildings, that they all had to feel safe and comfortable. When the warming room, our shelter, used to close at the end of April every year, the city used to say that the people that we served would find shelter during the warm months. And we used to respond by saying, no, they won't. They will simply move into tents and find secluded spots in the city's parks. They kept telling us, no, that will not happen. People don't go into tent. However, in early July 2019, when the warming room was closed permanently by the city, they got a wake-up call that when the tents that we had told them about didn't just disappear, but they came to Victoria Park and St. John's. They were right downtown. There were almost 50 tents at the height of the encampment at the park and 20 tents at St. John's. The previously invisible tents of Peterborough could not be more visible to people than they were when they were concentrated on two very prominent downtown properties that were passed by hundreds of people every day and within sight of both the City Hall and the county administration. Here's just a few pictures from our tent city last year. This is the front of St. John's looking north from Hunter Street, which is our southern boundary. And you can see in this front piece, we have a circular drive that comes up from the road and goes up and around in front of the tower door of the church. So in the middle circle, the grass in the middle there by the flagpole, there are 5 tents that you can see in this photograph. This is turned around looking in the opposite direction now from just beside the front door of the church, which is on the left-hand side of the picture. And there are 4 tents in this picture that are up on the little rise of ground that the church itself sits on. And then this is over on the north side of our property, looking south from Brock Street, which is our northern boundary, looking at the main entrance of the church where there were 3 more tents. And just so that you file this away for a few minutes from now when I talk about our meal program, the parking lot most people use at St. John's is to the left of this photograph. The doors in the center left are our main accessible entrance. And then down to the right, behind the greenest of the trees, is the lower level, and that's the entrance to One Roof Community Center that I will talk about in just a couple of minutes. This is the view from out of my office window across the street into Victoria Park, where there are about 15 tents in the left behind the hydro transformer, another 8 or 10 in the center of the screen just underneath those trees, and about another 15 scattered throughout the rest of the park. And up at the top of the little hill there on the right-hand side is where the county offices are. And at the far side of the park on the left is where City Hall is. So these 50 or so tents were extremely visible to the decision-making people in our community. This is just a Google Maps overhead shot of downtown Peterborough. The big park right in the center of the photograph is Victoria Park. Just below it, the next block down, that is our the city block that St. John's sits on. So you can see the big round driveway. The church and parish hall are in the middle at the top. Our seniors residence is in the top left, the sort of backwards L shape, and then some other commercial buildings that are there. And we own all the land, but we don't control the commercial buildings that are on either side at the bottom. And then just to the left and above Victoria Park in the middle, that big parking lot is the City Hall. So all these tents were very, very visible downtown Peterborough. The two streets to the left, Water and then George, are the main drags, one northbound and one southbound in the city. But there's challenges that come with hosting tents on your property, and this is one of them. We put out lots of extra garbage receptacles, but we often couldn't keep up. You can see a lot of garbage there. This was from a tent that was on the little open green spot. If you can see my cursor moving, that person got fed up with someone else and left, but left all their stuff behind. And you can see the plates in the foreground. We were still offering 2 meals a day there. So people would get their meal and then bring it up to their tent in order to eat it. And the plates often didn't get taken back. So that was a job for our staff to sort of collect plates and take them back into the outreach center. This was one of the things I took the most heat for. And one of the things that I kept reflecting back to people is, I can walk from my office to almost anywhere in the church buildings and walk by 6 garbage cans. And I can throw anything out that I want to, but it's a lot harder to do that when there aren't a lot of garbage cans around. So things that a lot of us take for granted, when you are homeless and living in a tent, it's hard to do. I have a pickup truck that once a week I would load up and take extra stuff to the dump that was not salvageable. Homeless person doesn't have a pickup truck that they can just take the stuff they no longer need to the dump. So there's just another sort of view of that shot. It's amazing the things that people collect. In the center left of the very left-hand edge of that picture, that's a beer keg. It's like, what does a 10-person need with a beer keg? But they had a beer keg. So there were lots of interesting things that I dealt with last year. One of the important things is that you have to go out. I went out every day that I was on the property, and I mixed with the people. I had a conversation with them. I asked them how they were doing. I would often bring out a cup of tea or a pot of coffee or whatever to share with people. And they were all pretty grateful that we gave them a space to hang out until they found a place to live. And we were working very hard to find places to live, both on our own and in concert with social services. And I figured that I'd made enough friends when I could usually go out there and at least one person would offer me a hit off their joint, which I did allow that if you were smoking pot or drinking beer right in the immediate vicinity of your tent, if I went home after work at the end of the day and wanted to have a beer on my front porch, I could do that. And this was their home for now. And so within reason, we allowed people to do what they would do at home. And this last picture of tents, this is January the 4th, 2020. This was the last 2 people that we finally housed on January the 4th, 2020. So the first tent appeared at St. John's on May 16th, 2020. The last tent left on 2019, rather. The last tent left January 4th, 2020. So for 8 months, we had guests living at St. John's on the property. It was something. I took a lot of heat, a little bit of it from my parishioners, a lot from other Peterborough residents, especially in the apartment building that's on the east side of our property. Some parishioners felt that the tents were a blight on our historic property and that the lawn would not recover. The garbage was an issue, as you can imagine, having seen those few photos. I rented a portable toilet so that people had a place to use the washroom when the church was closed. Our washer and dryer began to break down because they were being overworked. Some of the residents in the apartment building even started a campaign against me in the local media, but I had to chuckle at the response because unasked for support started to pour in the form of encouraging letters, emails, phone calls, and donations of money, clothes, food, camping supplies, water, and other sundries. There were even people that came from other communities to see what we were doing so that they could prepare to do it in their own town if needed. I told my parish that I was committed to this course of action for two reasons. The first was practical. People who had been put out of shelter when it closed needed a place to stay. And with the lowest vacancy rate in Canada, yes, the whole country, in 2019, finding shelter in Peterborough was not going to be easy. So if people were prepared to live in a tent while they looked for shelter, which was one of my conditions, that they had to be looking, we could provide the ground. This would be entirely consistent with the gospel mandate that Jesus gave us. The second reason was political. I wanted these tents and the people who lived in them to be painfully obvious to the community. I wanted residents to witness the sheer number of people without a home. I wanted politicians and city staff to feel the heat in a way that they hadn't had to before, because the invisible had to be made visible or nothing would be done. This is a short excerpt from the letter that I wrote to the parish back in May of last year, simply saying that, drawing on two biblical quotations, one, the list of things that Jesus gives us to do to the least of these in Matthew 25, and also the piece from Genesis 18, the story where Abraham encounters the three men of the Oaks of Mamre and says, do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers. I invited my parishioners to look at this somewhat difficult invitation to people without shelter as a way to show hospitality to strangers and to actually live out the calling that we have been given as Christians. As a result of the conversation that started when the tents appeared, local representatives of all four levels of government, city, county, provincial, and federal, hosted a roundtable with local social justice advocates to brainstorm an approach to reduce homelessness. I have never seen all four levels of government move so fast and so in sync as I did last summer. City social services staff were deployed from their offices to the streets, especially to the two tent encampments, to connect with homeless people, to start looking for housing. New affordable housing was announced. The city-run Brock Mission, which had been torn down and was to be rebuilt, but was stalled due to the budget, never mind that they dithered over the $400,000 over budget estimate for the mission, but had absolutely no problem giving a local developer over $1 million to start a luxury condo building right next door to the mission. The mission finally saw construction begin. A year later, there seems to be a bit of a lull in any progress, although the new mission should be completed in the next 6 months. And in 2019, the city housed 275 people on the wait list, which has more than 1,500 names on it, and provided rent or utility supplements to avoid evictions to 2,844 households. The report I mentioned at the beginning, Housing is Fundamental 2020, which is the 15th annual edition of this report compiled for the United Way of Peterborough, had this commentary. With Tent City 2019, the hidden issue of perennial homelessness could not be denied. Several severe contrasts in how we live in this community were exposed. Some city residents sympathized, wanting better solutions for the homeless, while others simply wanted it to go away, whatever it took. Are we, as a city of two communities, consistent with a nation of haves and have-nots? So that was my adventure last summer, and I still have some of the scars, but a year out, I am proud of the stand that we took at St. John's. I'm going to turn now to another ministry of hospitality that will be centered around food security and social inclusion. From 2014 to 16, the city provided some funding to a program run by the Canadian Mental Health Association in Peterborough that provided lunch and a drop-in center for 3 hours daily that was called The Lighthouse and run from the lower level of St. John's, which had been renovated with a second commercial kitchen, a bright lounge area, and a hall with table seating for 80, plus 2 smaller office and storage spaces and single-user washrooms. In 2016, the CMHA indicated that they no longer wish to continue to lead the program, and the city of Peterborough put out a request for proposals for a program that would do 3 things: provide a drop-in center for a minimum of 4 hours every day, provide 1 meal, preferably lunch, daily, and offer referrals to other agencies. St. John's was one of 2 proponents for the program, and we were the successful bidder. Thus was born One Roof Community Center, a program that offered a meal, a place to meet friends and socialize, and to access a variety of services offered in partnership with other social services and community agencies, all under one roof. One Roof is operated from January 1st, 2017 to the present time, with the current service agreement expiring on December 31st this year. We have answered the city's request for proposals for a meal program for 2021 to at least 2023, extendable to 2027, and we'll know in a few weeks if we've been successful in our pitch. We are currently the only proponent, according to the bids and tenders website for the city, but the city's only offering about 40% of the required budget for the new program, and we're not sure if we can fundraise the additional $250,000 a year needed to run it safely and sustainably. Pre-pandemic, One Roof operated 7 days a week and was open from noon to 7 p.m., except on days when it was either very hot or very cold, and we opened as an emergency cooling or warming center from 9 to 9. We provided lunch to an average of 150 people every weekday and supper to an average of 180 people every day of the year. Meals are served restaurant style. Guests are shown to a table that is set with real cutlery, a tablecloth, and a floral centerpiece donated each week by a local florist, and plates are delivered by staff and volunteers to the table. We worked with a local partner to provide a vocational training program which saw people on social assistance learn how to budget for, prepare, and serve meals, and receive certifications in safe food handling, first aid, and CPR. At the end of a 7-week program, a graduation ceremony was held in the parish hall. I remember one graduate who tearfully told the story of the day her son came to One Roof. He saw his mom through the serving window in the kitchen and proclaimed in a loud voice, "That's my mom working at her job." For a person on Ontario Works, hearing the pride in her son's voice as he told everyone within earshot about his pride, about what his mom was doing, was enormously encouraging for her. For someone who had, until she took this course, being an invisible member of the crowd, being seen by her son was an amazing experience of affirmation. Other partnerships with local service providers were critical. The VON 360 clinic provided in-house medical care in an examination room we created, and local veterinarians and hairdressers provided services for free on a weekly or monthly basis. Our staff were trained to make referrals to social services agencies as required, and, as so many are these days, are all trained in the administration of naloxone. We created and ran financial empowerment classes and other basic skills courses. We run a telephone bank that allows people without a home to have a voicemail box on our system to receive calls related to medical, legal, or housing appointments, and an ID hub that assists people to apply for government-issued ID and documents, and then stores them in a fire and waterproof secure storage facility so that they don't get lost, especially if someone's in the shelter system and doesn't have a safe place to store, for example, their birth certificate. One Roof Community Center is overseen by me as the rector of the parish, and financial record keeping is done by our full-time parish administrator. There's a full-time program coordinator, 2 kitchen supervisors, and a number of floor staff. We have approximately 300 volunteers associated with the ministry who do everything from interacting with people in the drop-in, assisting with some of the programs we have, to preparing and serving meals. The budget of almost $500,000 is funded about 40% by the city, 10% by grant-making funders. For example, we're one of the FaithWorks partner ministries, 30 to 40% by donors, and the rest by the parish. This is a keystone ministry in the city of Peterborough. In a community with a population of just under 85,000 people, we had over 89,000 individual contacts in 2019, more than one for every person living in the city. For many of the community members that we serve through One Roof, life is a challenge in one or more ways. People experience homelessness, food insecurity, loneliness, unemployment or underemployment, lack of access to healthcare, addictions, and ill mental health. And many of them feel invisible to the wider population and to the institutions that serve it. In a city that holds too many records, lowest vacancy rates in the country, highest rent as a proportion of income in the province, and highest rate of opioid deaths per capita in Ontario, the essential services that One Roof provides attempt to chip away at these statistics. One of our core principles is to see and affirm the community members who come to us as equally valuable members of our community as all the others, and even more fundamentally, beloved children of God. So that's where we were until March of 2020, when, as you all know, the COVID-19 pandemic struck. Before I talk about how we adapted our service model at One Roof in response to the public health crisis, let's just talk more broadly about how we all responded to the COVID-19 pandemic first. And this is where it could get a bit interesting, because I would like you to tell me what are the things that we have been asked to do during the pandemic in order to keep safe and healthy.
All right, so put up your hand if you can answer, and I'll unmute you. Leslie?
Leslie.
Okay,
self-isolate and socially distance.
Yes, socially distancing and isolating. Yep. Others. Allison, let's see.
Wash your hands a lot.
Wash your hands a lot. You got that from my title.
Yeah, you came up with that.
What other things? Joanne?
Joanne?
Just a minute. Right, I'll try again. Wear a mask.
Wear a mask, yes.
Although that came later. True.
And even then.
Mm.
So I think we've covered, so I've got clean your hands, safe distance, wear a mask. Don't touch your eyes, mouth, or nose. Cover your nose and mouth with your elbow or a tissue if you cough or sneeze. We talk about stay home, isolate. If you have a fever, cough, or difficulty breathing, seek medical attention. And one that I've seen quite a bit is avoid public transit and gatherings when possible. So all those things that, for me, you know, I'm probably fairly comfortably middle class. In March, when the bishops told us we had to close the churches, I told my congregation I would not be having church on Sunday, March the 15th. And then for the first few weeks, at least, I barely left the house, which was a privilege because my stipend wasn't going anywhere. My job didn't really depend on me going anywhere. It was very easy for me to do. But then I realized just how privileged it is to be able to check off all of the things on this public health checklist of things to do during a pandemic. Just for a moment, I invite you to put yourself in the place of a person who doesn't have a home, or a lot of discretionary income, or a car, or the ability to go and see the doctor whenever they want, or who is skeptical of any kind of institution, whether it's the police or a paramedic or a doctor, because they haven't had good luck with institutions in their lives. Put yourself in the shoes of a person with any one or more of those things, and then think about how easy it is, or not, to do all the things that we've been asked to do in order to protect ourselves during COVID-19. It's not easy at all. So, I'll just go back here. This is the park directly across from the church. There's a whole bunch of park benches. People would very frequently just lie down on a bench while they were waiting for us to serve the meal, etc. And now, as you can see on the sign, you are not allowed to go into the park. It wasn't quite as bad as last summer when they not only closed the park, but had police patrolling the park and issuing tickets to anybody that entered the park, whether they were walking or not, after Tent City had been taken away at the end of August of 2019. So you're not going to get a ticket, but they are going to tell you to move along if you're just hanging out in the park. And then another thing that we encountered in Peterborough, this is Dan. He's a homeless advocate. I'm sharing this photo because he allowed it to be printed in the local newspaper. But this is one of the municipally owned washrooms in Millennium Park, which is just a block south of the church. And what he's doing in this picture is pushing unsuccessfully on a locked door to use the washroom. So for a long time, until later in the summer, in fact, the city refused to open the public washrooms for people to use. And nobody could go into places like Tim Hortons or McDonald's or Subway or the mall or any other place that's normally easy to get into for the public in order to use the washroom or to wash their hands. So that's a huge challenge when washing your hands is probably the single best, most effective way to fight COVID-19. If you don't have a place to wash your hands, you are already behind everybody else who can be in terms of keeping safe. One of the other issues that we encountered is that, I know this is fuzzy, that's a screenshot. The blue sort of arrow in the middle rightish of the screen, that's the church. And we are right in the heart of downtown, which is where social services is. It's where any other food program is. It's where all of the access to services are. It's where you go to talk to somebody about getting a home. It's where all kinds of stuff happens for people who don't have shelter. And way down in the bottom left corner, I hope you can see this, there's a little gray dot and you can't really read the text, but it says Fleming College. Just above the word Fleming is the Peterborough Sport and Wellness Center, which is a big municipal gymnasium, etc. That's where they took all of the people who were in all three shelters. They closed all of the shelters downtown because of the physical distancing, and they took everybody out to the very edge of town into this big wellness center. Good in one hand, they were able to physically distance. They were able to have access to showers and and some equipment to use, etc. But this, from here to downtown, is 7 kilometers. If you want to go downtown, you either have to get a taxi, which you probably can't afford, or get on a bus, which you're not supposed to do. So it was really hard for people who are in the wellness center to get downtown to access the services that they need. So huge challenges for people that for a lot of us were things that we would take for granted. And then the other, I guess the last thing was just, in addition to not being able to wash your hands, there was no water available for a lot of people because all the fountains were closed. And the other issue, when you're already homeless, unemployed, food insecure, chances are pretty good that you have underlying health issues. And those things were just exacerbated by not having the ability to do all of the stuff that we've been asked to do in order to stay safe during the pandemic. So how did we respond at St. John's and One Reef Community Center to COVID? Well, the city staff came to us the same weekend that the churches closed back in March and told us that we could not open as usual the following week. Thankfully, due to both the public health and diocesan measures making provision for outreach ministries that directly served vulnerable populations, we didn't have to close completely. We were directed to close our space to everyone but staff. That meant, in the short term, cutting out our hundreds of volunteers who had been so vital to running the ministry, and it meant that the drop-in center, access to services, and all the sit-down meals were suspended. It meant that people no longer had access to a place to come in and get out of the cold, wet, or hot weather. They had no place to get a free coffee or to refill their water bottle or to use the washroom or to use one of our computers to access the internet. We were able to reimagine the roles of all of our staff and pivoted towards a delivery model where each morning was spent preparing meals for the day, then packing and distributing them, then cleaning up and doing whatever administration needed to be done. Hastily procuring takeout containers, we moved from a system where we served 5 lunches and 7 suppers a week to one where we distributed takeout meals every day at 1 p.m. from the parking lot outside the entrance to One Roof. We made sure that there was sufficient food that people were able to take one meal to eat now and one to keep for supper. In late March, we were serving about 50 meals a day as people who had come to eat more for the company than for the food stayed home because they didn't want to come out and potentially risk COVID. Through the summer, we started serving more meals, 100, then 120, then 150. On Thanksgiving Day, just a couple of weeks ago, we served 200. The need continues to grow as the pandemic continues. One discouraging part of this adaptation was that we solved one problem by creating another. We generate a lot of new waste now, especially with takeout containers and single-use water bottles. While everything is recyclable once we sourced containers that were not styrofoam, it's still waste that we didn't generate when we were able to serve meals inside. It also challenges our philosophy of providing food with as much dignity as possible. One Roof operates like a restaurant, not a soup kitchen, but our current pandemic takeout model more closely resembles a chow line than we'd like. But the positive side, of course, is that people who still need meals are getting 2 meals a day. So during the pandemic, we have shifted. This is the parking lot. You can see now we have the orange lines. People go out the driveway and then up and down the sidewalk on either side, observing social distancing, some better than others, given the population we serve. And they come forward and they get a meal, which is distributed by our staff and volunteers. Those are cardboard containers, not styrofoam, by the way. And they come out of the door, they serve them at the table. What happens is the food gets put down and then the person steps back and the guest comes and receives the food. And then of course, water. People need to drink water to stay alive. And as much as we hate generating this much plastic waste, it's really, really unreasonable to expect people that have a lot of trouble moving their possessions around to hold on to a water bottle all the time. So some of the things that we've learned over the last 7.5 months, doing everything that public health and other authorities want people to do is much easier if you're middle class and next to impossible if you're vulnerable in any number of ways. Everyone retreating, especially in the first wave, into their homes, just cast homeless and other vulnerable people adrift. I don't think a lot of people even thought of the fact that there was a whole section of the community that couldn't respond in the ways that many of us did. If we can't provide for needs as we did before the pandemic, we can organize ourselves to advocate on behalf of the voiceless and unseen. Things that most of us take for granted just don't exist in the world of homelessness, whether it's easy access to washrooms, a safe shelter, or PPE. The pandemic is not only a health crisis, but it's also contributing to the environmental crisis because of the generation of enormous amounts of single-use waste items, from straws to gloves and masks, water bottles, personal sanitizer bottles, etc. But when asked, community members who are in a more advantaged position are very generous. Kawartha Food Share, which is the collection point for food donations from individuals and corporations in Peterborough, and of which we are a member agency, has seen an increase in donations from businesses. And in the spring, collected 24 tons of food from the Spare a Square Porch Food Drive. Another drive is happening today, hopefully with similar success. And in the hottest part of the summer, we were able to advocate with others in the community for the city to provide a portable water refill station in the downtown. Parishioners of St. John's have also purchased 4 skids of water for One Roof to distribute. We are seeing new guests at One Roof and the number of meals has increased through the fall. Querying these new guests, we've discovered that many of the new people are folks who've lost their jobs since COVID started and have now exhausted all their financial reserves, so they must come to us for food. On top of the existing population already living in poverty, homelessness, and low or unemployment, there is a new wave about to crash of people who have lost their safety net as a result of the pandemic. And despite all of the setbacks experienced by vulnerable community members, they are still surviving as well as possible and are remarkably resilient given the challenges they encounter. There is much to admire in people who every day endure things that I can't imagine coping with. So that's a little bit about how our primary outreach program has responded to the pandemic, both in terms of understanding ways that we can advocate when we're not able to provide as much frontline service as we were, but also in how we have modified our delivery model in order to continue at least the very basic, which is the 2 meals a day, if not all the other services. So I'd like to begin to wrap up by having a conversation about things that you may have thought of as I've been speaking over the last 45 minutes. What can local parishes, what can individuals even do to assist those who are either at risk for or experiencing homelessness, unemployment, mental health crises, food insecurity, all of the things that we've touched on during this conversation. So just like to hear what your thoughts are now about what do you think might be possible in your context?
All right, I'll ask you to put your hands up because we don't have the chat function as this is the webinar channel. So please, if you have comments or questions, answers to Brad's question, please put your hand up. Allison?
Hi there. Thanks a lot, Brad. That was really interesting. And I've been kind of not just interested, but sort of cheerleading from afar for a while. And your defiance in the face of Peterborough Council was very impressive. A great witness to the social justice traditions that we hope to keep alive. I have thought for a while that the encampments in Toronto, which have appeared in any place where people can put their tents, were the kinds of things that parishes could support, could provide water or food or whatever to. And the parishes have not tended to be kind of into it, but there has been a network of encampment support emerge in this time. Mm-hmm. As most people in Toronto know, the courts just handed down a decision this past week that the city could evict the campers from the city parks. I'm wondering if there is a possible discussion of amongst Anglicans in this diocese about the feasibility of doing what you did, which is to say that our land needs to be a safe place for people to camp. Mm-hmm. And that it would be, most parishes have very little land in Toronto, unlike your capacious.
Yes.
Are we at a point where we can at least talk about this? Because those folks are about to get evicted from the public spaces in Toronto.
Andrea?
I was going to say it is a wonderful idea. I think many parishes have to check before they consider that whether the land they think of as their own is actually city property. Because I can think of 2 parishes off the top of my head whose green space feels like it belongs to the church, but is actually the city's. Just a little.
Well, that's Holy Trinity, certainly, and I'm sure there's others, but I just think we need to talk about that as a.
Oh, we do. We do.
I don't know, like Sanctuary in Toronto, I think has done quite a bit of work recently, sort of defying the trend and looking for support to help folks that are in the encampments. And so I think one of the things that I didn't say, because it wasn't specifically COVID, but the army of volunteers that we have are an incredibly diverse group of people. St. John's kind of owns, for lack of a better word, all of this programming, but the food program, and particularly pre-pandemic, was staffed in large part by almost every other church in the city, by a number of business groups that send people in, especially for the supper times, to help provide the meals. A couple of student groups from both Fleming College and Trent University. In fact, I don't live right in the city of Peterborough. I live in a small village just east of the city. And I happened to mention at a Christmas party a couple of years ago what we were doing at One Roof, and all of my neighbors in the village, we now have 24 of us that go once a month and cook one of the suppers. And so there are neighborhood groups that are involved in providing these things. So I think, yes, a conversation could be had amongst, churches in the deanery, for instance, but also look to your ecumenical neighbors in the neighborhood. Look at the churches that are doing the good work already in the other faith communities, and also the secular communities who are so often so far ahead of us in the church. Last August 24th was the day that the city came in and evicted everybody from Victoria Park, from the tent encampment there. And I was thoroughly chastised by a local housing and homelessness advocate, because I was there in my collar for the churches not doing anything, and your Jesus says that you should be providing shelter to the homeless and blah 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 blah. And one other person who is also a member of a secular agency came over and said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! You obviously don't know who you're talking to." That's the guy from that church right there. Oh, okay. So there are people out there who are, they probably consider themselves doing the work that we ought to be doing. And I know one of the things I had to work really hard at, sort of helping move my people along in the parish was the folks who are still stuck in that church on the hill mentality. This is the oldest church in Peterborough. This is this beautiful historic building, all those things. And what you are doing, you're putting it at risk. These people might damage the building, and to try to say to them, Jesus doesn't tell us to have an immaculate front yard. Jesus tells us to do these things. And not quite that kind of, what's the right word, snippy, I guess, but there is some pastoral care to be done in our churches if we're going to offer the space. It is the right thing to do, but not everybody will be there with us.
Thank you, Brad. Anyone else have a comment or question?
I just wanted to say we're currently working on a list of suggestions for parishes who've had to shut down their own ministries during COVID, whatever those might be, of ways that they could use their energies either to help other places that are open and running, or in advocacy. So that should be coming out very shortly. And if anyone here has information of that kind, feel free to send it either to Eileen or to me.
Right. So if there's no other comments, I'm just gonna, I did have a list. I think we've touched on some of them, and well, I understand we have about 15 minutes left, but I'll just sort of wrap up, and then if there's more conversation to be had, we can have it. And otherwise, there's a bit of a break until 2:30. But some of the things that we've discussed, but I'll just list off again so that they're fresh in your memory. If you have a kitchen in your church where you can safely prepare and deliver them, providing meals is really important. And there are many ways to do it. You can do it as we do, a restaurant that's capable of feeding 80 people at a time, or you can do it now, obviously not now in COVID, but you can do it in other times where you're gathering in local vulnerable people, and you can do the thing where you make enough food for a week and the group take some of the food home with them and do that once a week or once a month or something, and bring folks in. One of the other programs that we run in conjunction with the health unit is every Tuesday and Thursday, there are cooking classes, and folks have to be on social assistance to sign up, but they come in for the morning, they learn how to cook the meal, they eat the meal, they take home the leftovers, and they get a gift card and a menu card to be able to replicate that meal once themselves. Providing water, it seems so simple, but water in some ways is even more important than food, and it's just not available for a lot of people who can't lug around jugs of water when they're homeless and don't have access to things like fountains. So if you have a means to provide water, then please do. We are providing both bottled water, and we have a local Culligan affiliate very generously donated us a $4,000 water filter, water bottle fill-up machine like you see at the airport. They donated us one of those so that we can bring in a bottle, sanitize it, fill it up, and give it back to the guests that's given it to us. You can provide a hand washing station. And just so you can see this, Redeemer Toronto very recently did this. This is what it looks like. It's kind of like a porta potty, but for washing your hands. And it's out there by the fence, and people can come, and there's a little tap there and it drains out into the gutter. But if washing our hands is such an important piece of the fight against COVID, this is something that you could do. And all you got to do if you have a place to drain it is to keep it filled up with water and soap. And then, as Andrea just said, you can do advocacy. Advocacy in some ways is even more important because all of the things that I have talked about are Band-Aids. We should never have shelters. We should never have food programs. We should not need food banks. All of these things exist because we live in an unjust society. So we can advocate first for things like the municipal washrooms to be open, like there to be access for people to things like laundry and showers and hand washing and everything like that. And then we can advocate for housing first, and then for shelter and food programs when they're needed. I know the Dioceses is working on basic guaranteed income advocacy. That would solve so many issues if people had sufficient income to be able to have a house. We know here in Peterborough that there are a number of people that were involved in the recent pilot in Lindsay and in other ways, that one of the things that people tend to do is they put down payments on places that they could not otherwise afford because they want to get out of that drug den. They want to get out of that moldy place. And when the basic income thing was killed by the Ford government, all of those people ended up being out in shelters because they lost the place they could no longer afford, and the place they were in previously had already been rented to someone else. So we can advocate to all levels of government for things like basic income, which will change so many issues in our society that a lot of these Band-Aid solutions that I've discussed this afternoon would no longer be necessary. You can support local outreach in all of these areas through financial donations if you're unable to volunteer, by actually going and volunteering, or if it's your church and you have space. We couldn't run what we have at St. John's if we weren't blessed with having been on a hill and having 3 levels of facility, I guess. The lower level is entirely given over to outreach. And we have a second parish hall, a second commercial kitchen, sort of a duplicate of everything. So if you're in a parish that is also heavily resourced with building, especially these days when our congregations are increasingly unable to maintain our big buildings with the amount of offering that we're receiving from our congregations, there may be partnerships available with other organizations that would help you to recover some of the cost of the building by offering it as a space for an outreach program. And then finally, an individual piece that all of us could work on is along with the theme of this outreach conference today about making things that are invisible visible. When you see people on the street who are clearly part of our vulnerable community, actually see them. Don't just walk by, don't cross the street, don't ignore them. Often I find it's so important just to say good morning to somebody, If they don't get money, it's not the end of the world. They are often even more grateful to be acknowledged than to be given money. I remember last summer, I was walking by someone. I had actually just been to the Housing Tribunal advocating on behalf of one of my tenters. I was a little bit discouraged because we lost the appeal. But halfway back to the church, there was a guy sitting in front of the downtown mall playing his guitar. And when I walked up to him, he saw me and I was in my clericals, said, "Father, Father, I have a song just for you." And he played me a song, and it just, I cried. I stood on the side of the corner, the corner of the sidewalk there, and I cried, and I probably looked like an absolute moron to all the other people that were walking by, but it was so enormously touching. In that moment, that street person ministered to me rather than the other way around. So it's so important just to give people dignity. So to conclude, again, no one is disposable. They weren't disposable before the pandemic. They're not disposable now. Everybody deserves to be seen and valued. And I hope that if you didn't already see it before today, that as we all faithfully wash our hands to prevent the transmission of COVID-19, that it's also easy to proverbially wash our hands of the vulnerable among us, but that it then takes special care in a time of pandemic to not only provide for the practical needs of our neighbors, but to ensure that we include and value them as beloved children of God, deserving of the dignity of safe and secure housing, food, employment, and care. And I'm just going to share, this will be my last slide here, but if there's something that I've said today that you want to follow up on, I've just put my email and phone number up on the screen, and I would love to hear from somebody if you have a question about something that we've done in Peterborough, and if there's a way that we can help it. And know that, you know, I'm not an expert. There are tons of people throughout our diocese who are doing this kind of good work. And again, thanks very much for taking an hour out of your time today to listen to me talk about how we're trying to do the work of the kingdom here in Peterborough.
Oh, thank you so much, Brad. That was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you. Do you have another 9 or 10 minutes if people have questions right away?
Oh, I'm here till whenever. So yep. If there's more
Okay.
conversation, more questions, please.
Wendy, were you having a comment, or that was just a congratulations sort of thing, or thank you? Leslie?
Yeah, I was just curious. I think you said something about the homeless had been put up in the wellness center, community
Yes.
part of Peterborough. And I may have missed it because you had so much information. My head is just swimming with so many ideas now. But what is your church proposing during the winter months now when things are cold and, you know, if you can't have the tents, if you can't provide what you did last winter, what ideas have you got now for what you need?
So in Peterborough, the city reopened the shelters. So the folks that were at the wellness center are now back in the other shelters, and they invested in plexiglass cubicles for everybody. So all of the cots are, you know, physically separated from each other with a piece of 1/2-inch plexiglass, like an arena board. And then the city has reopened an emergency overflow shelter with additional 20, I think, additional beds, so that if the other shelters are full during the winter, there will be 20 more beds. And just last week, there was a story in our local paper about how one social services building, which usually has 15 city staff working out of it, but which has basically been closed since March because all of those staff are not frontliners and they've been working from home. They're looking at moving those people into other offices and turning that building into the emergency overflow shelter, so that not only will they have the plexiglass barriers, but actual rooms. So there'd be like 4 people separated in a room and 4 people in the next room and that sort of thing. But I have to say, I find that enormously frustrating, because we used to go to the city and say, you know, we'd like some more money to fix up the place that we were using as the shelter. It was another church's basement. And they never had the money. And now they've spent $800,000 on hotel rooms. and the wellness center over the last 7 months, and they've done all this other stuff. And, it's like, but there was no money for us. And the, One Roof's sort of future is in peril right now because I just don't think St. John's can continue to take the risk of running the program. Last year, we lost $70,000. That was only possible because St. John's has money to burn in some ways. But, the parish can't use our reserves indefinitely. And so if there's a $300,000 gap between city funding and budget, I don't think we're going to be able to run One Roof after the end of this year. I'm racking my brains on ways to run that with more volunteers and to do it safely and sustainably. But we're the only game in town, and it's hard to do that without some money. But there was this thing in the paper about that outreach or the shelter. There's 1.9 million available from I forget, social services ministry. There's 3 million available from long-term care and health. There's $4.3 million in the city's social services budget. So there's $8 million that we can use to retrofit a building, but they can't give me $200,000 to feed people. So it's very frustrating.
Well, I think your passion will ignite that in others, and I'm sure through prayer and commitment that you've demonstrated, I'm sure something will happen. Just don't get yourself ill over it.
Oh yes. Well, I actually have some really good relationships with local councillors. A lot of the hiccups we run into are staff. The staff have to follow the rules and don't usually have a lot of vision. So I've learned, don't waste time on staff, go to council. And one of the councillors actually rents our upstairs commercial kitchen and runs a catering business out of it. And 3 years ago, he was one of those people that came in and was like, those people about the folks that were coming in. And I went to him the other day and I said, I'm probably not supposed to talk to you because it's a conflict of interest because I'm bidding on this program. But I got to tell you how frustrated I am right now. And so he listened to me for an hour. And then he told me about how he used to think that, but now I've seen what you're doing here at St. John's with this program. You guys are doing incredible work. And I'm going to talk to a couple other councillors, especially the downtown ward ones, about, how could we move forward on making sure One Roof continues. And so I said to him, who'd have known that you would come to church and have a conversion experience, eh?
We have about 4 minutes left. If you have anything else for Brad before we need to go.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Brad.
Well, it's my pleasure. God bless you all for being here.
Thank you so much, Brad, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody at the plenary in a quarter of an hour or so.
All right.
Right. Thank you, Andrea,
Take
for
care,
helping.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.